Domesday Book is a manuscript record of the Great Survey of much of England and parts of Wales completed in 1086 by order of King William the Conqueror. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states, while spending the Christmas time of 1085 in Gloucester, William had deep speech with his councillors and sent men all over England to each shire to find out what or how much each landholder had in London, livestock and what it was worth. It was written in medieval Latin, was highly abbreviated, and included some vernacular native terms without Latin equivalents. The survey's main purpose was to determine what taxes had been owed during the reign of King Edward the Confessor. The assessor's reckoning of a man's holdings and their values, as recorded in Domesday Book, was dispositive and without appeal. The name Domesday Book came into use in 12th century. As Richard Fitzsteel wrote circa 1179 in the Dialogus de Scaccario, for as the sentence of that strict and terrible last account cannot be evaded by any skilful subterfuge, so when this book is appealed to, its sentence cannot be quashed or set aside with impunity. That is why we have called the Book of Judgment, because its decisions, like those of the Last Judgment, are unalterable. The manuscript is held at the National Archives at Kew, London. In 2011, the Open Domesday site made the manuscript available online. The book is an invaluable primary source for modern historians and historical economists. No survey approaching the scope and extent of Domesday Book was attempted again in Britain until the 1873 Return of Owners of Land, which presented the first complete, post-Domesday picture of the distribution of landed property in the British Isles. Content and organization. Domesday Book encompasses two independent works, Little Domesday and Great Domesday. No surveys were made of the City of London and Winchester, probably due to their tax-exempt status, and some other towns. Most of Cumberland and Westmoreland are missing. County Durham is missing because the Bishop of Durham had the exclusive right to tax it. In addition, parts of northeast England were covered by the 1183 Bolden Book, listing areas liable to tax by the Bishop of Durham. Little Domesday was named for being in a physically smaller format than its companion, but this survey is the more detailed, down to numbers of livestock. It may have represented the first attempt, resulting in a decision to avoid such level of detail in Great Domesday. Both volumes are organized into a series of chapters listing the fees held by a named tenant-in-chief of the king, namely religious institutions, bishops, Norman warrior, magnates and a few Saxon thegns who had made peace with the Norman regime. Some of the largest such magnates held several hundred fees, in a few cases in more than one county. For example, the chapter of the Domesday Book Devonshire section concerning Baldwin the Sheriff lists 176 holdings held in chief by him. Only a few of the holdings of the large magnates were held in domain, most having been sub-infeudated to knights, generally military followers of the tenant-in-chief, which latter thus became their overlord. The fees listed within the chapter concerning a particular tenant-in-chief were usually ordered, but not in a systematic or rigorous fashion, by the hundred court under the jurisdiction of which they were situated, not by geographic location. As a review of taxes owed, it was highly unpopular. Each county's list opened with the king's domain lands. It should be borne in mind that under the feudal system the king was the only true owner of land in England, under his allodial title. He was thus the ultimate overlord, and even the greatest magnate could do no more than hold land from him as a tenant under one of the various contracts of feudal land tenure. Holdings of bishops followed, then of the abbeys and religious houses, then of lay tenants-in-chief, and lastly the king's sergeants and Saxon thegns who had survived the conquest, all in hierarchical order. In some counties, one or more principal towns formed the subject of a separate section. In some the clamorets were also treated separately. This principle applies more specially to the larger volume. In the smaller one, the system is more confused, the execution less perfect. Domesday names a total of 13,418 places. Apart from the wholly rural portions, which constitute its bulk, Domesday contains entries of interest concerning most of the towns, which were probably made because of their bearing on the fiscal rights of the crown therein. These include fragments of custumals, records of the military service due, of markets, mints, and so forth, from the towns, from the counties as wholes, and from many of its ancient lordships. The crown was entitled to archaic dues in kind, such as honey, name. The manuscripts do not carry a formal title. The work is referred to internally as a descripture, and in other early administrative contexts as the King's Breviary. From about 1100, references appear to the Liber or Charter of Winchester, its usual place of custody, and from the mid-12th to early 13th centuries, to the Winchester or King's Rotulus. To the English, however, who held the book in awe, it became known as Domesday Book, in allusion to the Last Judgment, and in specific reference to the definitive character of the record. The word doom was the usual Old English term for a law or judgment. It did not carry the modern overtones of fatality or disaster. Richard Fitzsteel, Treasurer of England under Henry II, explained the name's connotations in detail in the Dialogus de Scaccario. The book is metaphorically called by the native English Doomsday, i.e., the Day of Judgment. For as the sentence of that strict and terrible last account cannot be evaded by any skillful subterfuge, so when this book is appealed to on those matters which it contains, its sentence cannot be quashed or set aside with impunity. That is why we have called the Book of Judgment. Not because it contains decisions on various difficult points, but because its decisions, like those of the Last Judgment, are unalterable. The name, Domesday, was subsequently adopted by the book's custodians, being first found in an official document in 1221. Either through false etymology or deliberate word play, the name also came to be associated with the Latin phrase domus Dei. Such a reference is found as early as the late 13th century, in the writings of Adam of Damerum, and in the 16th and 17th centuries. Antiquaries such as John Stowe and Sir Richard Baker believed that this was the name's origin, alluding to the church in Winchester in which the book had been kept. As a result, the alternative spelling, Domesday, became popular for a while. The usual modern scholarly convention is to refer to the work as Domesday Book, without a definite article. However, the form, the Domesday Book, is also found in both academic and non-academic contexts. Survey. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states that planning for the survey was conducted in 1085, and the colophon of the book states the survey was completed in 1086. It is not known when exactly Domesday Book was compiled, but the entire copy of Great Domesday appears to have been copied out by one person on parchment, although 6 scribes seem to have been used for Little Domesday. Writing in 2000, David Roper argued that the inquest and the construction of the book were 2 distinct exercises. He believes that the latter was completed, if not started, by William II following his assumption of the English throne. He quashed a rebellion that followed and was based on, though not consequent on, the findings of the inquest. Most shires were visited by a group of royal officers, who held a public inquiry, probably in the great assembly known as the Shire Court. These were attended by representatives of every township as well as of the local lords. The unit of inquiry was the hundred. The return for each hundred was sworn to by 12 local jurors, half of them English and half of them Norman. What is believed to be a full transcript of these original returns is preserved for several of the Cambridgeshire hundreds and is of great illustrative importance. The Inquisitio Eliensis is a record of the lands of Ely Abbey. The Exon Domesday covers Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, Somerset, and one manor of Wiltshire. Parts of Devon, Dorset and Somerset are also missing. Otherwise this contains the full details supplied by the original returns. through comparison of what details are recorded in which counties. 6 great Domesday circuits can be determined: Berkshire, Hampshire, Kent, Surrey, Sussex, Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, Somerset, Wiltshire, Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire, Middlesex, Leicestershire, Northamptonshire, Oxfordshire, Staffordshire, Warwickshire, Cheshire, Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, Shropshire, Worcestershire, the Marches, Derbyshire, Huntingdonshire, Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, Yorkshire. Purpose. 3 sources discussed the goal of the survey. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells why it was ordered. After this had the king a large meeting, and very deep consultation with his council, about this land, how it was occupied, and by what sort of men. Then sent he his men over all England into each shire, commissioning them to find out how many hundreds of hides were in the shire, what land the king himself had, and what stock upon the land, or what dues he ought to have by the year from the shire. Also he commissioned them to record in writing how much land his archbishops had, and his diocesan bishops, and his abbots, and his earls, and though I may be prolix and tedious, what, or how much, each man had, who was an occupier of land in England, either in land or in stock, and how much money it were worth. So very narrowly, indeed, did he commission them to trace it out, that there was not one single hide, nor a yard of land, nay, moreover, not even an ox, nor a cow, nor a swine was there left, that was not set down in his writ. And all the recorded particulars were afterwards brought to him. The lists of questions asked of the jurors were recorded in the Inquisitio Eliensis. The contents of Domesday Book in the Allied records mentioned above. The primary purpose of the survey was to ascertain and record the fiscal rights of the king. These were mainly the national land tax, paid on a fixed assessment, certain miscellaneous dues, and the proceeds of the crown lands. After a great political convulsion such as the Norman Conquest, and the following wholesale confiscation of landed estates, William needed to reassert that the rights of the crown, which he claimed to have inherited, had not suffered in the process. His Norman followers tended to evade the liabilities of their English predecessors. The successful trial of Odo de Baer at Pennant Heath less than a decade after the conquest was one example of the crown's growing discontented. The Norman land grab of the years following the invasion. Historians believe that the survey was to aid William in establishing certainty and a definitive reference point as to property holdings across the nation, in case such evidence was needed in disputes over crown ownership. The Domesday Survey therefore recorded the names of the new holders of lands and the assessments on which their tax was to be paid. But it did more than this. By the king's instructions, it endeavoured to make a national valuation list, estimating the annual value of all the land in the country, at the time of Edward the Confessor's death, when the new owners received it, at the time of the survey, and further, it reckoned, by command, the potential value as well. It is evident that William desired to know the financial resources of his kingdom, and it is probable that he wished to compare them with the existing assessment, which was one of considerable antiquity, though there are traces that it had been occasionally modified. The great bulk of Domesday Book is devoted to the somewhat arid details of the assessment and valuation of rural estates, which were as yet the only important source of national wealth. After stating the assessment of the manor, the record sets forth the amount of arable land, and the number of plough teams available for working it, with the additional number that might be employed, then the river meadows, woodland, pasture, fisheries, water mills, salt pans and other subsidiary sources of revenue. The peasants are enumerated in their several classes, and finally, the annual value of the whole, past and present, is roughly estimated. The organization of the returns on a feudal basis enabled the conqueror and his officers to see the extent of a baron's possessions, and it also showed to what extent he had under-tenants, and the identities of the under-tenants. This was of great importance to William, not only for military reasons, but also because of his resolve to command the personal loyalty of the under-tenants by making them swear allegiance to hymns. As Domesday Book normally records only the Christian name of an under-tenant, it is not possible to search for the surnames of families claiming a Norman origin. Scholars, however, have worked to identify the under-tenants, most of whom have foreign Christian names. The survey provided the king with information on potential sources of funds when he needed to raise money. It includes sources of income but not expenses, such as castles, unless they needed to be included to explain discrepancies between pre- and post-conquest holdings of individuals. Typically, this happened in a town where separately recorded properties had been demolished to make way for a castle. Subsequent history. Custodial history. Domesday Book was preserved from the late 11th to the beginning of the 13th centuries in the royal treasury at Winchester. It was often referred to as the Book, or Roll, of Winchester. When the treasury moved to the Palace of Westminster, probably under King John, the book went with it. In the Middle Ages, the book's evidence was frequently invoked in the law courts. Even in the 21st century, its information is referred to in certain cases. The 2 volumes remained in Westminster until the 19th century, being held at different times in various offices of the Exchequer. On many occasions, however, the books were taken around the country with the Exchequer. For example, to York and Lincoln in 1300, to York again in 1303 and 1319, to Hertford in the 1580s or 1590s, and to Nonsuch Palace, Surrey, in 1666. Following the Great Fire of London, from the 1740s onwards they were held, with other Exchequer records, in the Chapter House of Westminster Abbey. In 1859 they were placed in the new Public Record Office, London. They are now held at the National Archives at Kew. The ancient Domesday chest, in which they were kept in the 17th and 18th centuries, is also preserved at Kew. In modern times, the books have been removed from London on only a few exceptional occasions. In 1861-3 they were sent to Southampton for photosynchographic reproduction. In 1918-19, during World War I, they were evacuated to Bodmin Prison, Cornwall, and similarly in 1939-45, during World War II, they were evacuated to Shepton Mallet Prison, Somerset. Binding the volumes have been rebound on several occasions. Little Domesday was rebound in 1320, its older oak boards being reused. At a later date both volumes were given new covers. They were rebound twice in the 19th century, in 1819 and 1869, on the second occasion by the binder Robert Riviere. In the 20th century, they were rebound in 1952, when their physical makeup was examined in greater detail, and yet again in 1986 for the survey's 9th centenary. On this last occasion Great Domesday was divided into 2 physical volumes, and Little Domesday into 3 volumes. Publication. The project to publish Domesday was begun by the government in 1773, and the book appeared in 2 volumes in 1783. Set in a record type, to produce a partial facsimile of the manuscript. In 1811, a volume of indexes was added. In 1816 a supplementary volume, separately indexed, was published containing the X on Domesday, for the southwestern counties. The Inquisitio Eliensis. The Liber Winton, surveys of Winchester late in the 12th century. The Bolden Buke, a survey of the Bishopric of Durham a century later than Domesday. Photographic facsimiles of Domesday Book for each county separately, were published in 1861-1863, also by the government. Today, Domesday Book is available in numerous editions, usually separated by county and available with other local history resources. In 1986, a BBC released the BBC Domesday Project. The results of a project to create a survey to mark the 900th anniversary of the original Domesday Book. In August 2006, the contents of Domesday went online, with an English translation of the book's Latin. Visitors to the website are able to look up a place name and see the index entry made for the manor, town, city or village. They can also, for a fee, download the relevant page.